Hello friends, this is the recap of slides 21 through 25 that we did and that we looked at the end of our Blue and the Gray movie. Mary finds her home in the middle of a major battle. Where does she live? They live near Gettysburg in Pennsylvania. We also see Lincoln give his famous speech in the movie, which is called the Gettysburg Address. So he's actually there in Gettysburg. John goes to visit Emma in a city that's under siege by the Union Army. What city is it? Vicksburg. She lives in Vicksburg, and then we see her move to the caves in Vicksburg when her home gets destroyed. How long did the siege last? It lasted 6 weeks, which was a pretty long time if you think about it. Towards the end of the movie, we see Jonas loses his arm. How did that happen? Remember, he was trying to find the murderer that was killing wounded soldiers in the woods and attacking their camps at night. And he did come face to face with him, and then the killer slashed his arm with a sword, and he eventually gets an infection, and then he loses it. Where was the prison camp Luke was sent to? It's called Elmira, New York. How did Luke get out of prison? Jonas pretended he needed Luke as a witness to a war crime he was investigating and took him out of the prison. We first see Emma try to smuggle a gun into the prison, and she almost got arrested, and then Jonas kind of saved the day with all of them. The next thing on the slide is fact or fiction. So looking at two things in the video, or three things to see whether or not they actually happened in real life. Was there really a murder that killed the wounded Union soldiers and attacked their camps at night? No, there was not. There were some men who staged attacks on Union camps, but they weren't actually a part of the Confederate Army. So that is fictional. Did the Battle of Gettysburg did the Battle of Geyser Hill actually happen? So that was right outside John's family's home, right on the hill. No, that battle did not take place. They just created that for the movie. Was there really a train wreck that injured prisoners of war? Yes, that was true. It was the deadliest train wreck in U.S. history, and it killed as many as 80 people. So the one that Luke was on, that train that they talked about that crashed, that actually really did happen. So moving on, looking at slide 22, if we look at our timeline, we see the Emancipation Proclamation takes place when Lincoln emancipates the slaves. The siege at Vicksburg happens, which is also our movie connection. It drove many citizens to live in the caves along the Mississippi, as Emma did. So we see Emma move down there because she has nowhere else to go. And then Gettysburg takes place, and then Lincoln gives the Gettysburg Address a couple months later. So it kind of appears in the movie that he gives it like right after the battle, but it's a little bit later on that he does that. Trivia over here on the right-hand side, how many battles, campaigns, and skirmishes were there in the Civil War? There were over 10,000, so a lot, I think on a smaller scale than what we typically see nowadays when we see battles and wars and stuff like that. But that's why there were so many. The Confederate Army had their own balloon corps. Of how many balloons? They had 2 in their balloon corps, if you remember that from the video. Some notes, this is just kind of an interesting fact. Although the Battle of Antietam was the bloodiest single day of the war, Gettysburg was the bloodiest battle, okay? So just that one battle lasted 3 days. And a lot of people died and were injured in that one. Slide 23 is kind of interesting because it just looks at like who won which battles. You can kind of see the progression here. 2 of them were considered like inconclusive or neither side won, which was Hampton Roads and Battle of the Wilderness. That's where we saw Mark, John's brother, die in the fire. But Vicksburg, Shiloh were Union victories. Peninsula Campaign, Second Battle of Bull Run were Confederate victories. Antietam was a Union victory. Fredericksburg was Confederate. Gettysburg was Union. Chancellorsville was Confederate. And Atlanta was Union. So it's not that the Union totally dominated every single battle or every single part of the war. You can definitely see that there was parts and times that the Confederacy was very strong. Slide 24, if we look at our timeline, we see the Battle of the Wilderness then takes place in May. And that's when John's brother Mark dies in the wildfires. Battles for Atlanta come next, and then Lincoln gets reelected shortly after that, so September to November. Sherman's March to the Sea takes place, which he is attempting to capture thousands of slaves and take them with him, basically. So if you look at the notes, it says, despite General Sherman's efforts to stop them, thousands of slaves followed Sherman's army on their march. Okay, so they were all kind of trying to go that same way, that same route. And then lastly, slide 25, we see at the very end of the movie on our timeline, General Lee surrenders at Appomattox Courthouse, and then Lincoln is assassinated just a couple days later. So it's kind of crazy. I left that movie box blank because that one was basically supposed to be about Lincoln's assassination, but it's already on the timeline, so you can leave that one blank if you want. Then here on the left-hand side, Lincoln's wife Mary and one of his top advisors reported that he had a dream predicting his own assassination before he actually was assassinated, which is interesting. His wife suffered from depression for much of her life and was briefly placed in an institution after her husband's death. So she took it very hard and really struggled when he was killed. Trivia, number 8, true or false, Lincoln never really had a dream he believed helped him see future events. That is false. He actually did. And then true or false, John Wilkes Booth originally planned to kidnap the president. That is true. So John Wilkes Booth was the person who shot Abraham Lincoln and assassinated him. His original plan was to kidnap him. Last one on this slide. Which of the following men was also supposed to be assassinated the same night Lincoln was shot? All of those people listed were actually also supposed to be killed. So Ulysses S. Grant, Andrew Jackson, who was the vice president at the time, and Secretary of State William Seward. So they were all supposed to be killed that night, but that did not actually happen. Some of the other slides that we have nothing to add to, but just for kind of general information. Here's kind of a vocabulary glossary. So some of these terms you heard throughout the movie. Some of them you know, like casualty, a soldier who was wounded or killed or missing in action. But like artillery, you heard a lot. Or abolitionists, we've learned about emancipation, freedom from slavery, we've talked about that. Or an ironclad, which was a ship protected by armor. So a lot of these words are just kind of supposed to help you understand some of those things that we learned about. And then the last slide I'm going to show you today is a continuation of vocabulary there on the left-hand side. States' rights we've learned about. The Union, obviously, is that group of, in the North, of soldiers and whatnot. Yankee we hear a couple times throughout the movie. And then over here on the right is just kind of interesting to see like what they were called. So the different military ranks are listed there for you. And then how the groups are called too. So how they determine if it's a division, if it's a regiment, if it's an army. So that's kind of interesting too. So this is just kind of for your information related to the war.